hiker sends one last message from a silent summit. A plane vanishes after a routine radio call. A truck sits alone at the edge of a forest road. Across the mountains, people disappear without a trace, leaving only coordinates, witness sightings, and scattered clues investigators cannot fully explain. Storms move in, trails go quiet, searches come up empty. What really happens in these remote ranges, and why do so many vanish without answers? A range on the map with few roads nearby. In the Yukon Territory, the name White Mountains appears in Canada's geographical naming records as an official mountain range. The Canadian Geographical Names Database lists White Mountains in Yukon with mapped coordinates and a formal decision date, the kind of entry that fixes a name in public records, even when the ground itself is seldom visited. A Yukon environmental overview describes the White Mountains as an uplifted block of light grey Paleozoic limestone that produces extremely rugged topography. In daylight, the pale rock can stand out against darker valleys, and in colder months, the contrast increases as snow holds on ledges and gullies. This region is not organized around continuous roads. Travel between communities can involve long distances and limited services, and many backcountry routes depend on aircraft, river travel, or seasonal trails. When a person goes into a remote range with a planned pickup, the plan itself becomes part of the factual record. The time of departure and the time someone expects to return can be written down with precision, while what happens between those points may leave only partial traces. In northern mountain disappearances, the first confirmed facts are often logistical. A camp is found where it should be, a cache is intact, a planned flight returns to a lake and finds no one waiting. Those details do not explain a loss, but they establish what did not occur. An expected meeting did not happen, and the next steps begin with what is left behind. A well-documented Yukon case that shows this pattern occurred in September 2004, when Bart Schleyer, a wildlife biologist and experienced outdoorsman, went missing during a solo moose hunt in the backcountry near Reed Lakes. Accounts published later place his drop-off by floatplane on the 14th of September 2004, with a scheduled pickup date of September 27. The arrangement was ordinary for that kind of trip. It relied on a single return flight and a single meeting point. When the pilot returned on the scheduled date, Schleyer was not at the pickup site. The camp was there. The pilot flew back to Mayo and reported him missing, which initiated an RCMP response. The earliest stage of such searches is shaped by air access and weather. A plane can cover distance quickly, but it can only search what can be seen from the air or reached safely on foot in a limited window. Descriptions of the camp became the next layer of record. Food remained on site, including an action packer that was still full, and there was evidence of a partially eaten meal. No campfire was reported in the accounts cited, and items often carried in brush were left at camp, including a knife, a can of bear spray, and a VHF radio. A later description, in Yukon reporting, repeated in secondary summaries, noted the tent in an unusual way, as if it had been secured tightly into nearby vegetation. These details did not point to a clear direction of travel, and they did not provide the kind of disturbance that would settle questions quickly. A raft associated with the camp was found tied along the lakeshore about a half-mile away. That placed Schleyer away from the immediate camp area at some point. It also introduced water as a factor. Lakes in this part of the Yukon can be calm in 1 hour and dangerous in the next, especially when wind rises and temperatures drop toward freezing. The search did not produce an immediate resolution. Later writing about the case describes frustration among people who knew Schleyer and the region, particularly over how little could be done once weather and distance set limits. In one reported account, a friend, Dib Williams, chartered a plane and returned to Reed Lakes to search more intensively around October 1. That private effort is part of the documented sequence because it led to discoveries that shaped the rest of the case file in the public record. Objects were reported in positions that appeared intentional rather than scattered. Schleier's bow, quiver, and moose call were described as leaning neatly against a tree, with a dry bag nearby that may have been used as a seat while calling. The surrounding terrain was described as a mix of black spruce and willows, with open meadow close by, the type of edge habitat where a hunter might stop and work a call. Not far from those items, searchers reported a camouflage face mask with blood and hair. Bones were located later, including part of a skull with teeth still attached. Teeth from the skull were used to identify Schleyer. The remains described in public reporting were partial, and that partial recovery is one reason the case has remained difficult to settle in a way that satisfies a single, simple explanation. An Anchorage Daily News report from October 2004, preserved in an Alaska Outdoor Fatality listing, described the mystery surrounding the case and noted that only fragments of bone were recovered. Other accounts have stated that a bear attack seemed likely, while also noting that the cause of death was not officially determined in a manner that ended debate. When the physical record is limited, the file can hold facts about what was found without being able to state with the same confidence what happened in the minutes before. The backcountry does not preserve events evenly. Snow and rain remove tracks. Vegetation closes behind a person. Animals move through a scene without leaving a narrative that humans can read. What remains are fixed points, a date, a lake name, a raft line tied to brush, tools set down beside a tree. In a limestone range like the White Mountains, where slopes are steep and travel corridors are narrow, those fixed points matter because they are often the only parts of the story that stay stable from season to season. A search grid that expanded beyond the flight path. Radio traffic recorded during long-distance flights over northern Canada often becomes the final confirmed record of a journey. In remote air corridors, a short message to a monitoring station can mark the last verified moment of contact before an aircraft enters an area where terrain, weather, and distance reduce the chances of receiving another signal. The mountains of the far northwest, including ranges that extend across parts of Yukon, sit beneath several historic routes where military and civilian aircraft once crossed large areas with only intermittent ground stations listening for transmissions. On the 26th of January 1950, a United States Air Force Douglas C-54D Skymaster departed Elmendorf Air Force Base near Anchorage, Alaska. On a scheduled transport flight to Great Falls Air Force Base in Montana, the aircraft carried 8 crew members and 36 passengers, a total of 44 people. Flight planning documents placed the aircraft on a southern route over the Yukon before crossing into western Canada and continuing south toward the continental United States. The route was familiar to military crews operating between Alaska and the lower 48 states during that period. The aircraft made a routine radio contact approximately 2 hours after departure. The message was transmitted while passing near Snag, a small settlement in southwestern Yukon that served as a reference point for air navigation at the time. During that call, the crew reported encountering icing conditions on the wings. Such conditions were not unusual in winter flights over northern mountain regions, but the report indicated that weather along the route was deteriorating. After the message from near Snag, the aircraft was expected to report again when reaching another navigation checkpoint near Aishihik. That transmission never arrived. Air traffic logs recorded the absence of the scheduled call. When the aircraft failed to reach its destination on time, the flight was declared overdue and search procedures began. The earliest response relied on the information that already existed in the operational file, the filed flight plan, the time of the last transmission, and the general direction of travel. No distress signal had been received. No confirmed location beyond the Snag checkpoint had been logged. Military authorities from both the United States and Canada organized a large aerial search across the region. Contemporary accounts describe a combined effort involving dozens of aircraft, including transport planes and reconnaissance aircraft, flying repeated patterns over the suspected route. The search area expanded rapidly because the aircraft could have drifted away from its planned corridor after the last contact. Weather systems, navigation difficulties, and the possibility of mechanical trouble meant the actual path could not be assumed to match the filed plan exactly. Reports from that period describe aircraft scanning wide areas of mountainous terrain covered by winter snow. Visibility from the air varied sharply depending on cloud cover and daylight hours. Snowfields and frozen lakes sometimes reflected light in ways that obscured dark objects below, making wreckage difficult to identify even when search planes passed nearby. In winter conditions, daylight is limited, and aircraft searching large regions must return frequently for fuel. Each search flight therefore covered only a portion of the possible area. Search logs compiled during the operation included numerous sightings that initially appeared promising. Some pilots believed they had seen possible debris or aircraft shapes on distant slopes. Ground teams investigated several of these reports, but confirmed that they were natural formations or shadows cast by uneven terrain. These mistaken sightings were recorded and removed from consideration as the search continued. Complications increased when aircraft participating in the search experienced accidents of their own. At least one Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft and several American planes involved in the operation crashed while flying search patterns in difficult weather. Crew members survived in some cases but required rescue themselves, temporarily diverting resources from the original mission. Wreckage from one of the crashed search aircraft was briefly mistaken for the missing Skymaster until investigators identified the aircraft type. Despite weeks of aerial and ground searching, No confirmed debris from the missing transport was found. No signal from emergency radio equipment was detected, and no confirmed eyewitness accounts placed the aircraft beyond the last transmission point. The search area eventually extended across a vast region of northwestern Canada and parts of Alaska, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles. Operational reports from the time show how investigators attempted to reconstruct the final portion of the flight using limited data. Weather records were reviewed to understand icing conditions reported by the crew. Navigation charts were examined to determine whether the aircraft might have altered course to avoid storms or mountainous terrain. Without wreckage or a confirmed crash location, these evaluations remained theoretical reconstructions rather than verified finding. In the absence of physical evidence, the official record developed through administrative documentation. Radio logs preserved the time and wording of the final message. Flight manifests listed the people on board. Search summaries described areas that had already been examined from the air and by ground teams. Each document added a layer to the record without revealing the location of the aircraft. The disappearance of the C-54 Skymaster remains one of the most extensive unsolved aviation losses connected to northern Canada. Later, historical reviews note that no confirmed wreckage has ever been located, despite the large search conducted in 1950. Without a crash site, investigators could not determine a definitive cause of loss. The aircraft and everyone aboard were eventually listed as missing and presumed dead. Incidents like this illustrate how a disappearance in remote mountain regions can begin with a single missed communication. The final recorded words from the cockpit describe a routine operational condition, ice accumulating on the wings, before the aircraft continued into a region where contact was not restored. From that moment forward, the investigation depended on logs, search maps, and the limits of visibility across a landscape that extended far beyond the original flight path. Coordinates that remain when the mountain gives few answers. Records connected to mountain disappearances are usually built from fragments of verified information rather than a single decisive discovery. A location appears in a message or a photograph. A trail register shows the date when someone entered a route. A search report lists the areas that were checked without finding anything. When terrain is steep and remote, these fragments often remain the only reliable points investigators can confirm. Mountain investigations therefore depend on the stability of recorded facts. Timestamps, coordinates, and communication logs are preserved because they remain unchanged even when the environment alters the physical landscape. Snowfall, rockfall, and weather can transform a slope within days. Written records, however, retain the moment when a person was last known to be moving through a specific place. A documented example illustrating how such records guide an investigation is the disappearance of British hiker Esther Dingley in the Pyrenees. Dingley, a 37-year-old long-distance traveller, originally from Durham, England, had spent several years hiking across Europe while documenting her journeys online. In late November 2020, she began a solo trek in the Pyrenees, near the border between France and Spain. On 21 November 2020, Dingley set out from the Spanish town of Benasque for a multi-day hike through the mountains. The following afternoon, she reached the summit of Pic de Sauvegarde, a peak rising more than 2,700 meters above sea level. At approximately 4 p.m. on 22 November, she sent a message and photographs from the summit to her partner, Daniel Colligate. A brief video call followed. That communication became the last confirmed contact with her. The plan described in those messages indicated that she intended to continue toward the Porte de la Glaire, a high mountain pass that crosses the international border. The route between the summit and that pass traverses steep ridges and rocky slopes typical of the Pyrenean high country. Weather in the area during late November often includes snow accumulation and strong winds. When Dingley failed to return or send additional messages during the next several days, Colligate reported her missing on 25 November 2020. French mountain rescue units, including the Peloton de Gendarmerie de Haute Montagne, began searching the region. Helicopters and ground teams examined routes near Pic de Sauvegarde and surrounding ridges. Search records show that the terrain complicated early operations. The area contains narrow valleys and steep rock faces where visibility changes rapidly with cloud cover. Helicopters scanned slopes where a fall might have occurred, while ground teams moved along trails and across exposed ridgelines. Despite these efforts, no immediate trace of Dingley or her equipment was discovered. Winter conditions forced authorities to suspend large portions of the search in early December 2020. Heavy snow in the Pyrenees made high-altitude operations dangerous and obscured potential evidence. The suspension did not end the investigation. It shifted the emphasis to documentation and later seasonal searches. Authorities preserved communication records, the coordinates of Dingley's last message, and maps of the areas already examined. During the following months, both official teams and Dingley's partner continued to revisit the region. Without equipment, clothing, or remains, investigators could not determine whether she had fallen, become injured, or moved into another valley. The first physical evidence appeared more than 8 months after the disappearance. On 23 July 2021, a mountain runner discovered part of a human skull near a path below the Porte de la Glaire, several kilometers west of Pic de Sauvegarde. Authorities conducted DNA analysis, which confirmed that the remains belonged to Esther Dingley. The location of the skull corresponded closely with the route Dingley had described in her final messages. Investigators returned to the surrounding slopes to search for additional remains or equipment. These follow-up searches relied on the coordinates of the discovery and the known route between the summit and the pass. Further remains were discovered on 9 August 2021, when Daniel Colligate located additional bones and equipment in the same mountainous area. The findings confirmed that the incident had occurred near the high ridge between France and Spain. Forensic examination provided additional information about the circumstances. Investigators concluded that the most probable cause of death was an accidental fall in steep terrain. The French prosecutor, overseeing the investigation, stated that the injuries indicated a fall of approximately 30 meters. Although that assessment clarified the likely cause, the complete sequence of events was never reconstructed. Mountain environments rarely preserve a clear scene after months of exposure. Snowmelt, erosion, and animal activity can scatter objects or alter their positions. When remains are discovered long after the event, investigators rely primarily on location data and forensic analysis, rather than on intact physical evidence. The Dingley case illustrates how mountain disappearances often move through several stages of documentation. The first stage records the last confirmed communication, which in this instance occurred on a summit where photographs and a video call established the time and place. The second stage documents the search operations, including the routes examined and the weather conditions affecting those searches. The final stage begins when physical evidence appears, sometimes months later, allowing investigators to connect the evidence with earlier records. Throughout this process, the coordinates associated with the last known location remain central. The summit of Pic de Sauvegarde, the Porte de la Glaire Pass, and the site where the skull was discovered became the key points recorded in the official investigation. Each point fixed the search within a smaller geographical frame. Mountain investigations frequently rely on this narrowing method. A disappearance initially covers a wide area because the exact path of travel is uncertain. As information accumulates, communications, sightings, or recovered objects, the possible area becomes smaller. Even when the cause of death is determined, the case file continues to preserve these geographic markers because they define the verified sequence of events. The terrain itself often remains silent about the details. High mountain slopes change constantly under weather conditions. Snowfields move downslope each winter, carrying loose rock and debris. Trails disappear under snow for months at a time and reappear in spring. Because of these changes, investigators treat coordinates and time records as more reliable than the landscape itself. Dingley's disappearance is therefore preserved through a series of documented points. The summit message on 22 November 2020, the missing person report 3 days later, the discovery of remains on 23 July 2021, and the additional recovery on 9 August 2021 form the chronological structure of the case. These events are recorded in investigative reports and public statements, providing the most stable account of what occurred in the mountains. In remote ranges, such as those across northern Canada, including the isolated terrain surrounding the White Mountains, investigators follow the same approach. The environment may erase traces of movement quickly, but the records created by communication systems, search teams, and forensic analysis remain unchanged. Each coordinate and timestamp becomes part of a lasting archive that defines the limits of what is known. The vehicles that wait at the edge of the trees. A disappearance in remote mountains is sometimes recognized first through something that does not move. A truck remains parked longer than expected. The driver's seat is empty. Gear is still inside. This is not evidence of what happened, but it is often the first confirmed fact that separates an ordinary trip from a documented search. From that point, the case file tends to build outward from fixed objects and fixed times. The rest of the record is built from distances, terrain, weather windows, and the limits of what search teams can confirm. When a vehicle is found in a backcountry access area, the documentation begins with basic identifiers. Police note the make, model, and plate information. Search managers record where it was located and when it was first observed. They also document what was inside, because contents can establish what the person likely carried away and what they left behind. In mountain regions with minimal foot traffic, that inventory can matter as much as any footprint, since it is one of the few pieces of information that remains unchanged after the first day. The search phase usually begins with a narrow operational question rather than a narrative one. Investigators ask where a person could realistically travel from the vehicle's location within the time available, considering daylight, weather, and the person's purpose for being there. A hunting trip creates a different footprint than a hiking loop. A day outing is approached differently than a multi-day trip. None of these elements explain an outcome, but they shape the early search grid and determine where the first ground teams are sent. A recent case in northern British Columbia shows how an investigation can stay anchored to the last known vehicle location, even as the search area expands. James Joseph Edmund Barnes, commonly known as Jim Barnes, was reported missing after failing to return from a hunting trip on the 18th of October 2024. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police stated that he had gone hunting in his pickup truck with his dog, a golden retriever named Murphy, and did not return home as expected. The first verified facts were not about an encounter in the woods. They were about timing and a missing return. The file began with an expected endpoint that never occurred. Police information releases described the investigation moving quickly to the location believed to be associated with his trip. Chetwynd RCMP were advised in the early hours of the 19th of October 2024 that a missing person investigation was underway, with reason to believe Barnes may have been in the Chetwynd area. This early inter-detachment notification is typical of rural regions where access roads and Forest Service routes cross jurisdictional lines. It creates a documented administrative chain showing when responsibility was shared and which area became the initial focus. Barnes's pickup truck was later found, and official reporting noted that his hunting equipment was inside, while Barnes and Murphy were not with the vehicle. This detail shaped the practical assumptions used in early search operations. If equipment and other items remained in the truck, searchers had to treat the absence of the person and the dog as the primary fact, rather than the vehicle's condition indicating a clear direction of travel. In such cases, the truck becomes a fixed coordinate, while the missing person's path remains undefined. A vehicle seen like this tends to produce two parallel records. One is investigative, centered on missing person documentation and any possible third-party involvement. The other is operational, built by search and rescue managers who treat the truck location as a last known point and begin a radius-based search. In densely forested and mountainous terrain, that operational record often includes terrain constraints that are not visible from standard maps. Logging cut blocks, creek lines, steep side slopes, and unmaintained spurs can alter where a person might realistically travel. Search leaders document these features because they determine where teams can safely move and where a person might be funneled by geography. Public reporting in the first week of the Barnes search described multiple search and rescue teams being involved in northeastern British Columbia, including aerial support. That type of response is consistent with a case where the last known point is a road-accessible area, but the surrounding terrain expands quickly into difficult ground. Once a search extends past the vehicle's immediate vicinity, the file becomes a sequence of search zones, each defined by time, personnel, and visibility conditions. In the Barnes case, later news accounts described the truck being located with personal items and equipment associated with the trip. Those items were described in media reporting as including keys, a wallet, a backpack, and a rifle, while Barnes and Murphy were not located nearby. When an inventory like this becomes part of the public record, it can influence how subsequent tips are evaluated. If certain items remained behind, claims that a person traveled far while carrying those same items become less consistent with the known record. It does not resolve the event, but it affects how investigators assess what could fit inside the established facts. Another feature of vehicle-anchored cases is how they handle negative findings. When teams search areas around the truck and find nothing, those results are still entered into operational documentation. The absence of tracks, clothing, or discarded equipment becomes part of the search history. Over several days, that history can narrow where it is reasonable to concentrate resources, while still leaving a wide uncertainty margin. This is one reason official searches are sometimes paused after a defined period. The pause is a change in operations, recorded in the file, not a resolution. In late October 2024, reporting described the official search for Barnes being suspended after a period of searching. The language used in such announcements is generally careful. Search agencies describe what was searched and what was not found, while leaving the investigation open and encouraging tips. In remote terrain, suspension often reflects the limits of daylight, staffing, and weather, rather than any change in concern. The Barnes case developed an additional layer of documentation through the later recovery of Murphy. In early December 2024, international reporting described Murphy being found in poor condition at a significant distance from the original search area and being taken for care while authorities and family members sought confirmation. The return of a dog in a missing person case does not explain the missing person's movements, but it creates a new set of verified points: where the dog was found, the dog's condition, and the time frame during which it could have traveled. Those points become part of the broader record because they can be compared with terrain corridors, river systems, and winter travel conditions. Media reporting also described the case as producing few clear clues beyond the vehicle and later developments related to the dog. That is a common outcome in mountainous regions with extensive forest cover and limited human presence. If weather changes soon after a disappearance, footprints can be erased, and the most reliable information may remain the earliest fixed facts: the date the person left home, the date the vehicle was located, and the areas searched in the first operational window. A year later, the RCMP issued a further update stating that Barnes remained missing. The update confirmed the core factual framework. He was reported missing on the 18th of October 2024 after not returning from a hunting trip. He left home in his pickup with Murphy. The truck was later found, and both Barnes and Murphy were not with it at that time. Updates like this function as record maintenance. They reaffirm what is known and invite new information, while showing that the case remains active. Vehicle-based last known points recur in Canadian mountain disappearances because they are often the only location that can be verified without interpretation. A person's intended route may be known only through a brief statement. A day plan can change in minutes after arriving. The vehicle does not change its position, and that fixed coordinate allows every later entry in the file to reference a starting point. The search may expand to rivers, ridges, and secondary roads, but the investigative record continues to circle back to the same early facts because they are the most stable. In regions described as White Mountains, whether because of pale rock, snow cover, or the way ridges stand out on winter maps, the practical constraints remain similar. A person can disappear without leaving a readable trail, and the record can grow through operational documentation rather than physical discovery. A parked truck, the last verified time scene, and the logged search zones can become the main structure of what is known. The weather reports that quietly change a search. Weather is one of the most consistent entries in mountain disappearance records. Search teams may not know where a missing person traveled, but they can reconstruct the environmental conditions that existed during the critical hours after the last confirmed sighting. Meteorological records are archived continuously, and these records allow investigators to examine wind speeds, snowfall totals, temperature drops, and visibility conditions that occurred in the exact time window when a person was believed to be in the mountain. In mountain terrain, weather does more than influence comfort or travel speed. It can determine whether footprints remain visible, whether helicopters can fly, and whether a person could survive without shelter. Because of this, search managers review weather data early in an investigation. Hour-by-hour observations from nearby stations, satellite images, and regional forecasts are compiled and placed into the search documentation. This information is not used to speculate about events. Instead, it defines operational boundaries. For example, if heavy snowfall began within hours of the last confirmed sighting, investigators know that surface tracks may have been erased quickly. If strong winds were recorded along exposed ridges, search teams may focus more attention on sheltered valleys where a person might have sought protection. Weather also determines when a search can take place. Helicopters cannot operate safely in dense cloud or strong winds. Ground teams cannot enter avalanche-prone slopes after heavy snowfall. When these conditions occur, search managers document the limitations in official reports. These notes explain why certain areas were not examined immediately, even when those areas were considered important. A well-documented example illustrating the influence of weather on a mountain disappearance is the case of British climber Tom Ballard, who went missing in the Himalayas in early 2019. Ballard was an experienced mountaineer and the son of British climber Alison Hargreaves. In February 2019, he travelled to Pakistan with Italian climber Daniele Nardi to attempt a winter ascent of Nanga Parbat, one of the world's highest mountains. Nanga Parbat rises to 8,126 meters and is known for extremely severe winter conditions. The route Ballard and Nardi attempted was the Mummery Spur, a steep ridge first explored by British climber Albert F. Mummery in 1895. Winter attempts on the mountain are rare because storms and extreme cold make rescue operations almost impossible. Ballard and Nardi were last seen during their ascent in late February 2019. On the 24th of February 2019, a photograph was taken showing the climbers high on the Mummery Spur. This image later became the final confirmed visual evidence of their position on the mountain. After that point, no further communications were received from them. When contact was lost, other climbers and expedition teams in the region began monitoring the situation. Weather data from the mountain showed that severe winter storms had struck the area shortly after the climbers were last seen. High winds and heavy snowfall were reported on the upper slopes. These weather conditions had two direct consequences. First, they created a high probability that the climbers had been exposed to avalanche risk. Second, they prevented immediate rescue flights from reaching the area. Helicopters require clear visibility and stable air conditions, both of which were absent during the storm period. As a result, the first phase of the search relied on remote observation rather than direct intervention. Climbers at base camp used telescopes to scan the ridge, while nearby expeditions shared satellite images in an attempt to identify signs of movement or equipment. These observations were recorded and later included in the official documentation of the disappearance. Several days later, when the weather improved, a helicopter search began. Pakistani military helicopters flew reconnaissance missions along the Mummery Spur and surrounding slopes. Search crews examined areas where avalanches had occurred during the storms. The helicopter teams were accompanied by experienced climbers who analyzed the terrain during the flight. Their task was to identify any signs of climbing equipment, rope lines, or debris that might indicate whether climbers had fallen or been buried by snow. Despite repeated flights, no immediate trace of Ballard or Nardi was located. The weather returned to unstable conditions, forcing the search to pause again. Each interruption was recorded in operational reports, which documented the exact times when flying conditions were judged unsafe. Weeks later, after further aerial reconnaissance, search teams observed shapes in avalanche debris along the Mummery Spur. These shapes were believed to be the bodies of the climbers. Due to the steepness of the slope and the continued avalanche danger, recovery operations were considered too dangerous to attempt. Pakistani authorities eventually declared both climbers dead. The official assessment concluded that an avalanche likely occurred shortly after the last confirmed sighting. This conclusion was based primarily on weather records showing heavy snowfall and strong winds in the days following February 24. Even with this assessment, investigators did not reconstruct a detailed sequence of events. The mountain environment did not preserve clear evidence. Snowfall and subsequent avalanches altered the slope repeatedly during the weeks following the disappearance. By the time the suspected location of the climbers was identified, the original scene had already changed significantly. The case demonstrates how weather records can become one of the most important components of a mountain disappearance investigation. Unlike physical traces, which may vanish quickly, meteorological data remains available through national weather services and satellite observations. These records provide a timeline of environmental conditions that existed during the critical period. For search managers, weather information serves multiple purposes. It indicates where a person might have sought shelter, where avalanche hazards may have occurred, and when search operations were physically possible. It also helps explain gaps in search coverage, showing when aircraft or ground teams were unable to operate. Weather data is also used to understand how quickly evidence may have been erased. Fresh snowfall can bury footprints within minutes. High winds can move loose snow across slopes, covering tracks and equipment. In high mountains, storms can transform the terrain so quickly that a location visited by search teams one day may appear completely different the next. This dynamic environment makes the preservation of meteorological records essential for investigators trying to reconstruct conditions. Ballard's disappearance illustrates how investigators rely on these records when other information is scarce. The final photograph, taken on February 24, established the last confirmed sighting. Weather reports documented the storms that followed. Avalanche activity recorded during those storms explained why the climbers may have disappeared from view. The investigation therefore combined three types of evidence: visual confirmation of the climbers' last position, weather records describing conditions on the mountain, and later aerial observations identifying possible remains. Each of these elements was documented separately but interpreted together. In remote mountain environments across the world, including the ranges of northern Canada and the Yukon's White Mountains. Investigators apply similar methods. Weather reports from nearby stations, satellite data, and avalanche bulletins are collected during the early stages of a search. These records provide the only continuous timeline of environmental conditions affecting the missing person. The physical environment may not preserve a clear scene, but meteorological records remain consistent. A storm recorded at a specific time and location cannot be altered by later events. Investigators therefore treat weather data as a reliable framework around which other evidence can be evaluated. The case of Tom Ballard and Daniela Nardi remains an example frequently referenced in mountaineering investigations because it demonstrates how environmental conditions shape both the disappearance and the search that follows. The storms recorded after their last sighting defined the operational limits faced by rescuers and influenced the conclusions drawn by investigators. In mountainous regions, weather reports quietly become part of the permanent record of a disappearance. They appear alongside coordinates, communication logs, and search summaries. Together, these records provide the most accurate reconstruction possible when the terrain itself offers few answers. The trails that continue after the last confirmed sighting. Trail systems in mountain regions often create the final shared space between a missing person and the public record. A path through forest or along a ridge can serve hundreds of hikers in a single season, yet when a disappearance occurs, the trail becomes a line investigators return to repeatedly. Search teams walk sections that others used days earlier. Rangers review visitor logs and permit records. Witness statements are compared against maps to determine where someone was last seen moving through the landscape. Unlike vehicles left at trailheads or coordinates taken from messages, sightings along a trail depend on memory. People remember clothing, direction of travel, and time of day. These details are written down soon after a report is filed, forming another layer of documentation in a search file. Witness accounts do not explain what happened after the sighting, but they narrow the point at which the person was last known to be moving normally. Mountain disappearances frequently produce one final encounter with another traveler. A brief exchange on a trail, a greeting at a viewpoint, or a passing moment along a ridge may become the last verified observation before a person enters a section of terrain where no one else is present. That final encounter is documented carefully because it fixes a moment when the person was still following a recognizable route. A widely documented case that illustrates this pattern is the disappearance of Canadian hiker Jordan Natera in British Columbia in 2016. Natera, a 25-year-old mechanical engineering graduate from the University of British Columbia, travelled to Strathcona Provincial Park on Vancouver Island for a solo hiking trip in early October of that year. Strathcona Provincial Park contains rugged terrain that includes alpine ridges, steep valleys, and remote lakes. One of the best-known routes in the park is the Golden Hinde, the highest mountain on Vancouver Island. Reaching the summit typically requires several days of travel along established trails and then climbing through more technical terrain. Natera began his trip on the 1st of October 2016, entering the park near the Comox Glacier area. He carried climbing equipment and camping supplies appropriate for a multi-day expedition. Park staff later confirmed that he intended to climb Golden Hinde and return along the same route. During the early days of the trip, several hikers encountered Natera along the trail system leading toward the mountain. Witnesses described seeing him moving through the area in good condition, carrying a backpack and climbing gear. These sightings became the last confirmed observations of him during the journey. When Natera failed to return as expected, his family reported him missing on the 5th of October 2016. Authorities in British Columbia initiated a search that included ground teams, helicopters, and volunteers from local search and rescue organizations. Investigators began by reviewing the witness accounts from hikers who had seen Natera earlier in the trip. These statements helped determine where along the route he was last observed traveling toward Golden Hind. The information allowed search teams to focus on the approach routes and climbing areas connected to that trail system. The terrain around Golden Hindi is complex. The final section of the climb involves steep rock and narrow ridges. Weather in early October can include rain, fog, and rapidly dropping temperatures at higher elevations. Search teams examined both the hiking routes and the climbing sections where an accident might have occurred. During the initial search operations, helicopters flew repeated reconnaissance missions over the ridges surrounding Golden Hinde. Ground teams walked the established trails and inspected campsites where climbers often stop before attempting the summit. Despite these efforts, no sign of Natera or his equipment was located. Search records show that the operation continued for several weeks as teams expanded their coverage of nearby valleys and cliffs. Helicopters revisited the same ridges from different angles, while ground crews examined areas below steep rock faces where a fall might have occurred. The search was eventually suspended after extensive coverage of the region failed to locate any trace of the missing hiker. At that point, the official record contained several confirmed elements: the date Natera entered the park, the trail routes he planned to follow, and the witness sightings, placing him along the approach to Golden Hinde. Nearly 3 years later, new evidence emerged. In May 2019, hikers discovered climbing equipment and human remains near the summit ridge of Golden Hind. Authorities recovered the remains and conducted identification procedures. The BC Coroner's Service confirmed that the remains belonged to Jordan Natera. Officials stated that the location of the remains indicated he had reached the summit area of the mountain before the incident occurred. Investigators concluded that Natera likely died in a mountaineering accident while descending from the summit ridge. The precise circumstances of the fall were not reconstructed in detail because the terrain and weather conditions over the intervening years had altered the location significantly. The discovery location corresponded closely with the route he was believed to have taken based on earlier witness sightings along the trail system. Those sightings therefore remained an important part of the case record even years later. In mountainous regions, such as those found across Western Canada and the northern ranges surrounding the White Mountains, trail systems often serve as the last structured paths through otherwise trackless terrain. Once a person leaves those paths or enters a section where few others travel, the investigation depends heavily on the final verified sightings recorded along the trail, objects that appear long after the search. In mountain disappearance records, equipment sometimes becomes the first physical trace recovered after long periods without evidence. A backpack, a boot, or a climbing rope can remain in place long after weather has erased footprints and tracks. These objects are not explanations by themselves, but they establish points that investigators can document with precision. Each recovered item adds a coordinate and a time to the record. In some cases, years pass between the initial search and the moment when an object is discovered. Mountain terrain contributes to this delay. Snowfall, rockfall, and vegetation growth can conceal equipment in areas that were previously searched. Seasonal melting can expose items that had been buried beneath ice or snow. Because of these changes, investigators sometimes receive reports of objects from hikers or climbers who encounter them long after the original search has ended. When equipment is discovered, authorities treat the location carefully. The position of the item is recorded through photographs, coordinates, and written reports. Investigators document how the object appeared in the terrain and whether it showed signs of damage or weather exposure. These details become part of the official record because they help determine how long the object may have been in that location. A well-documented case demonstrating the role of recovered equipment is the disappearance of American hiker Geraldine "Jerry" Lage along the Appalachian Trail in the United States. Although the Appalachian Trail runs through eastern forested mountains rather than the far north, the investigative process surrounding the recovery of her equipment illustrates how long-delayed discoveries can clarify parts of a disappearance. Lage, a 66-year-old retired nurse from Tennessee, was hiking the Appalachian Trail in Maine during the summer of 2013. She began her journey as part of a long-distance hike that involved traveling hundreds of miles along the trail system. On the 22nd of July 2013, Lage left the Poplar Ridge Lean to Shelter in western Maine and continued hiking north along the trail. Later that morning, she stepped off the path to relieve herself and became disoriented while attempting to return. According to later investigative findings, she wandered away from the main trail and was unable to relocate it. During the days that followed, Lage attempted to contact her husband using a cell phone. Phone records later showed that she sent several text messages asking for help. One message read, "Lost since yesterday. Off trail 3 or 4 miles. Call police for what to do." These messages were not delivered immediately because there was no cell signal in the area at the time. When Lage failed to reach her next scheduled meeting point with her husband, authorities in Maine began a search operation on the 24th of July 2013. Search teams included wardens, volunteers, and trained tracking units. Helicopters flew over forested sections of the Appalachian Trail corridor, while ground teams examined the trail and nearby terrain. Despite extensive searching, no trace of Lage was found. The search covered thousands of acres of forest and continued for several weeks. After the initial effort ended without results, the official investigation remained open but inactive. More than 2 years later, in October 2015, surveyors working in the woods of western Maine discovered a small campsite deep in the forest. Inside a tent, they found a backpack and personal belongings. The campsite was located approximately 2 miles from the Appalachian Trail. Authorities examined the site and confirmed that the remains found in the tent belonged to Geraldine Largay. The location of the campsite indicated that she had set up shelter after becoming lost. Investigators also recovered her backpack, cell phone, and journal. The recovered journal provided additional documentation about the final weeks of her life. In written entries, she described attempts to signal rescuers and conserve supplies. One note recorded that she had heard search helicopters but was unable to reach them. The position of the campsite and the items inside the tent became the key physical evidence in the case. Investigators measured the distance between the campsite and the Appalachian Trail and reviewed maps of the earlier search operation. Although search teams had passed through nearby areas, dense forest and uneven terrain likely prevented them from noticing the campsite during the initial search. The Maine Warden Service later released portions of the investigative report describing the recovery of Largay's equipment. The report explained how the location of the campsite, the condition of the gear, and the written journal entries allowed investigators to reconstruct part of the sequence that followed her disappearance. The discovery of the backpack and journal provided information that had not been available during the search. These objects confirmed that Largay had remained in one place after becoming lost rather than continuing to travel through the forest. They also demonstrated that she survived for several weeks after leaving the trail. The equipment itself remained relatively intact despite the passage of time. The tent had partially collapsed, but the items inside were preserved well enough to be documented. Each object was photographed and catalogued before being removed from the site. Investigators did not attempt to reconstruct every movement Largay made before establishing the campsite. Instead, the official record focused on the verifiable evidence recovered from the location where her belongings were found. The campsite coordinates, the items present, and the journal entries became the central elements of the case file. In mountain environments, the recovery of equipment often becomes the first concrete evidence after long periods of uncertainty. A backpack, a tent, or a climbing tool can establish a new location within the investigation. Once documented, that location provides investigators with a clearer picture of where the missing person traveled after the last confirmed sighting. The file that continues long after the search ends. When a disappearance occurs in remote mountains, the investigation rarely ends at the same moment the physical search stops. Helicopters return to their bases, ground teams leave the field, and temporary command posts are dismantled. Yet, the official case file remains active in a different form. Police records, search summaries, and witness statements continue to exist as permanent documentation. These materials become the most durable part of the event because they preserve confirmed information even when the landscape reveals little. Mountain terrain often limits the amount of physical evidence investigators can recover. Weather changes rapidly, and snow or rain can erase tracks within hours. Steep slopes and thick vegetation conceal objects that might otherwise be visible. Because of these conditions, investigators rely heavily on administrative documentation to preserve the known facts. The time a person entered a trail system, the location of the last confirmed sighting, and the areas searched by rescue teams are recorded carefully. These entries form the backbone of the case file. Once the search phase ends, those documents serve another purpose. They allow investigators to revisit the case years later if new information appears. When remains or personal belongings are discovered long after the disappearance, the earlier records provide a framework that helps authorities understand where the person traveled and what search areas were previously examined. A well-documented example of how a disappearance continues through preserved records is the case of David Sneddon, an American traveler who vanished in the mountains of China in 2004. Sneddon was a 24-year-old graduate of Brigham Young University who traveled to Asia in the summer after finishing his studies. During the trip, he visited several remote regions in western China. His journey eventually brought him to Yunnan province, an area known for steep mountains and deep river valleys. In August 2004, Sneddon arrived in the region surrounding Tiger Leaping Gorge, a dramatic canyon carved by the Jinsha River. The gorge lies between the Jade Dragon Snow Mountain and Haba Snow Mountain ranges. Trails running along the sides of the canyon are used by hikers traveling through the area. On the 14th of August 2004, Sneddon checked out of a guest house near the gorge and set out along the trail system. Witnesses later reported seeing him hiking along the path that day. These sightings became the final confirmed observations of him during the trip. When Sneddon did not appear at his next planned destination and failed to contact his family, authorities began looking into his disappearance. Local officials in China organized a search in the Tiger Leaping Gorge region. Search teams examined sections of the trail and areas near the river below the canyon. Early reports from the investigation suggested that Sneddon might have fallen from the narrow mountain path into the river far below. The Jinsha River moves quickly through the gorge, and a fall into the water could carry a person downstream over long distances. Despite this possibility, search teams were unable to locate remains or personal belongings. The absence of physical evidence meant that the official record of the disappearance relied heavily on witness statements and travel documentation. Investigators recorded the time Sneddon left the guest house and the trail where he was last seen walking. These details became the core facts preserved in the case file. In the years following the disappearance, Sneddon's family continued to seek information about what happened. Media reports and family statements kept attention on the case, and additional leads were occasionally presented to authorities. In 2016, members of the Sneddon family publicly stated that they believed he might have been abducted rather than dying in an accident. Their claims were based on information they said had been received from contacts in China. These statements led to renewed interest in the case and prompted further discussions with officials. The U.S. State Department confirmed that it remained aware of the case and that Sneddon continued to be listed as missing. However, no confirmed evidence was produced to support any specific explanation for his disappearance. Without recovered remains or equipment, the case file still depends on the earliest verified details. Those details remain unchanged nearly 2 decades later. Records show the date Sneddon left the guest house near Tiger Leaping Gorge. Witness accounts confirm that he was seen walking along the trail on the 14th of August 2004. Search operations were conducted in the canyon area afterward but did not locate him. Because these facts are preserved in official documentation, investigators can still evaluate new information against the established timeline. If credible evidence were discovered in the future, authorities would compare it with the original witness reports and travel records to determine whether it aligns with the known event. Cases like this demonstrate why disappearance files are preserved carefully even when the outcome remains uncertain. The written record provides a stable framework that survives long after physical traces vanish from the landscape. Each document records something confirmed at a specific moment in time. In mountain regions around the world, including the remote ranges of northern Canada and the White Mountains of the Yukon, investigators follow the same method. A disappearance may begin with a trail, a date, and a final sighting. Search teams document their efforts, and law enforcement agencies record every verified detail. Even when the terrain does not reveal what happened, the file remains. The mountains can erase footprints and conceal objects, but the documentation remains unchanged. Coordinates, witness accounts, and search reports continue to exist as a record of the event. Long after the search teams leave the field, those documents remain the clearest outline of what is known. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more deep dive documentaries like this one. Leave your thoughts in the comments and let us know what topic you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for watching.